My name's Ian Austin. I'm sat in a field on a bench and it's a very windy Sunday morning, but this is Friday Night Shudder. So episode 3 then, quite a nice little thing to think about, making it to the third episode. I started this with the idea that I would do live recaps, I guess, watching the movie and doing my live reactions, and that worked brilliantly for episode 1, Zombie Flesh Eaters. And then in week 2, episode 2, I thought I'd try something different given the nature of the property I was doing a recap of. It was VHS, which is, a lot of you hopefully will know, is a movie split up in chapters, and I thought why not try doing a podcast that was more aimed at that, so it focused more on the individual parts and then the overarching nature of it. And I think that went well. I was very proud of last week's episode. I don't think it got quite the receivership that the first one did, but to be honest, I think Zombie Flesh Eaters is a much more fun movie to watch. Nothing against VHS, but I have more fun watching Zombie Flesh Eaters, and I feel the audience to a degree shares that. And I do feel that that's quite symbolic too, you know, with movies like The Avengers and Black Panther out this year, we are dealing with a lot of, for lack of a better term, non-alive characters, if you will, in popular fiction. I won't go into too many details because probably some people haven't seen Avengers who will listen to this podcast, at least I hope, maybe a couple. At any rate, the point I'm trying to make is that I can do whatever I want on this podcast, and what I want to do today is not do a full recap. I've done an hour 40, I've done 2 hours, and I would like to try something different today, and today it's just going to be my thoughts on the first time I watched VHS 2. I remember I watched VHS, oh god, I'm aging myself a bit, probably about 5 years ago. I heard about it, and I'm a big fan of horror movies, as you can see. I'm not so much in character today as I normally am, but I'm a really big fan of horror movies, and I just thought it looked interesting. I like anthologies in theory. They're not all great. ABCs of Death 2 is pretty bad. There's a holiday one which has a short by Kevin Smith, which is pretty... You wouldn't know it's Kevin Smith if you hadn't seen his name on the end credits of that particular segment, and it was okay. I mean, I feel like Kevin Smith is someone who, I think he understands horror. I don't think he's the best person at putting it across, but I respect that he's trying to move away from his standard two people in one scene having witty dialogue. You know, it's good to change up now and again, as this podcast is proving, because this is nothing like episode 2, which wasn't much like episode 1. I can't guarantee they'll happen every week. I think there will be some weeks where the content is quite similar week to week. This is just me branching out. Like, I know what I'm doing on a sort of ongoing basis. It's always going to be either a movie on Shudder, or in some cases like the upcoming bonus episode on VHS Viral, which is, I like keeping track of what I've watched, and feel like if I'm going to do an episode on VHS and an episode on VHS 2, I should do an episode on VHS 3, but not a full episode, because in terms of like a continuity, like Zombie Flesh Eaters is 101, VHS 102, VHS 3 is 103, which got next Friday, and VHS Viral will be a bonus episode. Won't count to the ongoing seasonal, in quotation marks, episode. It'll count more like a bonus one, like I say. But yeah, so I first watched VHS about 5 years ago, and I remember at the time when I watched it, I enjoyed it. It was kind of sleazy and grimy, but I think I liked that about it, because despite my comments last week about being uncomfortable a fair bit about some of the nudity and some exploitation issues, it did something horror doesn't do nowadays, which it felt gritty and, you know, disgusting at points, but, you know, actually had the effect. Like, a lot of horror is sanitized nowadays, and it's not got that effect. Like, Eli Roth has that effect. to a degree. Like Green Inferno is straight out of the cannibal movies of like 70s, the really disgusting ones. And VHS feels like something which could have been made in the 80s. The effects are better now to an extent, except for the CGI, but you can definitely see through line between sort of some of the more not grindhouse, video nasty 80s movies to VHS. There's a good through line to those, between those rather. But at the same time, I enjoyed it, but I didn't think the writing quality or directing quality is quite up to scratch. Like, the passion overrid the technical quality and the esoteric enjoyment, I guess you could say. And I feel VHS 2 did something much different, which was it went full-blown to get, I won't say best directors on planet, but I will say that it really went out of its way to get some interesting visual directors who did a really good job of it. And I think nowhere can that be expunged more than the sorry, I'll be looking up on my iPad. Guy made Raid, I think it's Gareth Evans, and his insanely brilliant, that's the one I'm going to be mostly focusing on, his insanely good section. Yeah, his insanely good section for this movie where he co-directed, but his part where he deals with the Japanese cult and the documentary makers coming in to document it and reveal what it's truly like to the outside populace, and like all the intrigue about who's got the female documentary maker pregnant, her boyfriend or his best friend, and all that intrigue, and then you throw in all the gore and the cult and the weirdness and the creepy music and creepy visuals and the zombification, and then rise up with like the zombie goat or the devil, I guess, and like the guy at the end, and it's not, I should have spoilers, but if you're watching a horror review of VHS, it's been out years, you should have watched it, is what I'm saying, because this is still quite a niche podcast, and I apologise if I've ruined the movie for you, but there are a lot more shorts in it, so. But that one I really like, because it's really strange and interesting, and I think sometimes horror should be like that. You deal with a lot of horror, and it, like I said before, it's quite sanitized and it's quite mundane, and that segment was particularly interesting because it was weird, and weird is good. Like Cabin in the Woods, I think, did a mainstream version of that where it tried to populate all the tropes that people knew and do them in an interesting, clever way, but I feel Cabin in the Woods falls down because it pits the most boring possible villains, kinda, like, and that's what I like about VHS 2. It's strange, like, you can feel this is made by people who wanted to make a unique horror movie, and it doesn't always succeed, but when it does succeed, like in the section at the Japanese cult reform school, it's just the strangeness, the starkness of visuals too, like the use of background, images in background, like repeated imagery. Characters will walk past a classroom and kids will be learning. They'll walk past later on and kids will be dead. They'll walk past again and kids will be alive and zombified. And they'll be at class and they'll be listening to teachers teach class. And it's the use of repeated images to trick the viewer, or not even trick the viewer, to lure the viewer into false security. It's the equivalent of a visual Chekhov's gun. You see it, and then when you see it later on, that's when it pays off. And VHS 2, particularly this section, does a great job of that because it plays with your expectations. It's like this thing in background that you've barely looked at is suddenly paramount in the last act. In last act the short, because obviously it's split up in segments. So it's going to be a loose structure of the detectives this time. That's one of the things I actually like about VHS 2 when I first saw it. They get away from the sleazy guys trying to make their video in the first one and go to private detectives. Still not most likeable characters, still morally grey, but different. And I will say this, I enjoyed it, not simply because I didn't want to see the sleazy video trolls again, because I thought they did a good job in the first one of painting the Beatles, the four Beatles and zombie Brian Epstein. I think they did a good job painting them as characters who you could understand what they're going for, but you couldn't relate to them. So in terms of going back to that nastiness of the 80s, where no characters are likeable, it did a great job. But you can't necessarily do that in the sequel. You need to do something different. And with Private Detectives, they did. You have them go to the house to investigate why this college student's gone missing, and then create a neat mystery of they've got to watch through tapes to find out what's going on. And then throughout the movie, you come back to them and the female private detective starts getting more and more messed up by the more she watches. Her nose bleeds, she passes out. And then a bit at the end, the twist with the revealing guy made his own video, which is fascinating because it creates this idea of people immortalising themselves with the video, which is actually a nice form of continuity and does pay off in the next movie to an extent. And I think I like that. Again, morally grey private detectives were a nice, interesting way to bring something new into the movie, because they hadn't up to that point really delved into the outside other people, like the law enforcement, not quite official law enforcement, but that sort of approach of what would they think of what was going on, and didn't quite go as far as I was hoping it to when I first saw it, but I did enjoy it. I thought those characters were quite interesting, and I thought their fate was fascinating because it was like you become part of the video, which is just interesting. Like, it forces us to watch people watching a video. So, that puts us in culpability. We're watching them watch. It goes back to that old phrase, who watches a watchman? And like in the last video with Doc Manhattan, all of that, it's been stranger connections made. So just enjoying a nice cup of Earl Grey. It's beautiful, beautiful tea. So other segments I enjoyed first time I watched it. I liked the Clarissa Explains It All style one. I don't think that's the actual title, but with the guy in the eye implant, and he starts seeing weird shit because his eye taps into a different frequency, and never sure whether the corporation knows that the eye's doing that, and he's willingly using this guy as test subject or not. It's left very vague, but that's fascinating because I grew up watching a lot of these later than the actual date, but a lot of 80s movies, not necessarily all horror, but stuff like RoboCop did with the corrupt corporate executive, and scientists who did stuff without thinking whether they should do it, and that's always fascinating to me. And I thought this section did a nice job for that too. I thought it did a solid effort at portraying body horror. Not to Cronenberg levels, because no one does. I mean, The Fly is the remake of Fly is legitimately one of the best horror movies ever made, and also very strange, which horror should be strange. It's meant to be a representation of your innermost fears, and by that I mean director or writer, but also their weirdness. That's why David Lynch is so good. He doesn't make horror per se, but he has horror in his movies, and it's very terrifying. And now we come back and we get to the other segment I really like, the sleepover, which goes into the minds. It does something different. It casts people you can believably buy as teens and young teens. Sorry, yawn. And it plays with that because you think it's going to be a sort of slasher kind of aspect, because we haven't really had that, but then they play with that by going the alien route, and not just alien route, dubstep aliens. And this is part I love most about VHS 2. I remember watching this for the first time. It was I think it's at the my previous residence. It's kind of like key work accommodation, and it's really late at night, and I just was watching. I rented it because I enjoyed VHS, and I thought I'd watch a sequel. And I rented it, and it's very late at night, so I put headphones on, and I put those on so loud when those aliens came out, were like, wow, wow, and it just hit me like a brick. I was like, je ne sais quoi? What is this? This noise in my ears. And I was baffled, but I really started getting into it because it was so strange. It's a really interesting musical cue, you know, like everyone talks about the Inception horn and stuff like that. They should watch VHS too, because that takes it to the next level. That's not an Inception horn. That's an Inception bass drop. You know, that's like an Inception Dead Mouse shit. You know, like dubstep to the extreme, and use of colours also, because you never really saw the aliens clearly. It goes back to that idea that the best way to encapsulate like monsters and things like that is to show them fleetingly. And VHS 2 does such a good job with those dubstep aliens, because you only see parts of them, letting like either shadow or smoke or even it's fireworks at points, and music's blaring and it's disconcerting because you're being put in the mindset of someone seeing that for the first time. It's never clear whether the music is inherent to the scene, whether it's diegetic or non-diegetic, but the idea I have is that the characters aren't hearing it. They're reacting to what they're seeing with terror, and we're hearing it as the audience to spark us up into to jerk, for lack of a better term, to jerk us awake so we can see the images, we can see aliens and get that proper sense of fear going. You know, it's if you're not Stanley Kubrick and you can't make horror out of still images, out of the stillness of people, then use whatever techniques you got. And there's no harm in using techniques like smoke or strobe lights or loud music. If you use them properly, it can be an effective technique, and in this case it really was. And my profound memory of that is, I don't think I came up with the idea of the dubstep aliens. I mean, by which I mean in my head I did. I don't know whether anyone's caught on to it, but that to me is the defining images, I guess I'm right, of VHS 2, because it was a combined sequence and it was really terrifying. The sparseness of dialogue as you go on, it just becomes people trying to escape, and it's very real, despite the fact that you're dealing with aliens. They make it very real and very terrifying, because it's literally, there's no plot. That's not a flaw in this case, you know. It's not a flaw because they're playing with the idea that these people are trying to survive, and tension comes from the fact that they clearly can't, and creative use of camera. Normally in these movies you penalise people for using camera and running with it because it's stupid. In this case, they don't get a chance to breathe. They're just running for their life, and camera work is really shaky and really incoherent because it's kids and teenagers using camera, and they don't want to record anything. They just want to run for their life, and they happen to record a fair bit, almost by proxy. I do remember there's one scene where I think there's a woman on the pier, and she's falling in water, and she's trying to get back up, and you see all these aliens in the background, and it keeps strobing and smoke and clearing and passing and clearing and come back, and you come up, creeping up behind them, and they're just crawling, and it's just a lack of grace. You know, it's like very weighty aliens. You feel like they're struggling to adapt to our climate and our sort of terraces, I guess, lack of a better word, like wood and stuff like that. They're not used to it. They're not used to water. They're just trying to grab people and take them in space. And that's really cool. I really enjoyed that. I'm trying to think of the other segments from VHS 2. So I've got to go to the iPad because I've watched it a lot, but those are three: the dubstep aliens, the cult. Oh shit! What's the other one? The frame narrative, both gone on that. Oh right, yeah, that's it. The the last segment actually, the Riding Park, which was actually co-directed by one of the guys behind Blair Witch, and this actually did redeem Blair Witch for me a lot, because I don't like Blair Witch. I don't think it's a very good movie. This is a disgusting zombie movie. There's no plot. Like, there's the loosest plot of this guy who gets bit by a zombie and starts turning into a zombie, but then he's trying to get to his partner, and then he eventually realises he's zombie and he's a monster, so he tries killing himself and lets himself be killed. And it's disgusting. The gore. Like, first time I watched it was on a iPad, and I wasn't aware of how violent it was. And then I rewatched it on HD TV. Guys, this is probably one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen, and I've seen a lot of shit. I mean, once you've seen a Serbian movie, oh god. And by the way, don't watch that. Don't research it. I'm not joking. That's one of the most horrifying images, horrifying moments of my life. Like, that existential dread when you thought we've gone too far as a civilization of people who make horror movies to make something like that. It's just awful. Worse than that fucking ending of Megan's Missing. I don't know really what more there is to say about VHS 2. I think the problem is, at some point I am going to do a full recap of it, but like I said, I just wanted to go over some experiences of it, try and make a shorter episode this week. I feel like it's a very underrated movie. I'm a big fan of VHS 2. I kind of don't want to... I'm spoiling a fair bit, but I don't want to spoil too much, because I think what I hope is that you'll listen to this one and either... And not either, actually. I hope you'll just go and watch VHS 2 again on Shudder, because it's a really good movie and it's very entertaining. It's very violent. And the Safe Haven, I looked up the name, Gareth Evans, Safe Haven bit, is genuinely one of my favourite horror things from the last 10 years. I feel like... Actually, I should add, from last week, the section with the siren was turned into a full movie, and I'm sure at some point I'll watch that, but it's probably a while away, because I don't feel it needs to be a full movie. And same thing, Safe Haven. Safe Haven is a perfect mini movie. The full movie, Safe Haven, the actual one based on Nicholas Sparks book, I think, was play awful, be honest, but Safe Haven, the VHS short, it's really good. And I feel like VHS 2, when it really gets it, and 4 out of 4 actually, because I enjoyed all segments, I think they really understood much better in this movie how to construct the sequences and chapters, so they were good. VHS seemed to be a lot of let's just improvise. VHS 2 seemed to be a bit more professional and much more cohesive, I guess. I mean, they're not stepping on anyone's toes this time. I think one flaws with anthologies is that they all start telling the same story or similar stories, and this one, they're just telling the best 4 stories that the people they got could do. And they did a really good job. So yeah, VHS 2 and episode 3. I think it's quite an interesting change of pace. I'll be interested to see how you guys react to this one. But don't worry, VHS Viral is next up as a bonus episode, and I'm going to be doing a live review recap for that. Just got to figure out when I'm going to record that. Maybe some point next week. Anyway, until next time, remember, life is beautiful.